Ford has built some engines that refuse to quit. They've also built a few that keep mechanics busy and owners frustrated. Some run past 300,000 miles with basic care, others will eat head gaskets, timing chains, and bills before you hit 100,000 miles. Today we're breaking down the 3 worst and 4 best Ford engines to own. These picks come from real owners, repair records, and long-term reliability. By the end, you'll know which Ford engines are worth owning and which ones cause regret. Let's get started with the engines you should avoid at all costs. If there's one engine that you definitely don't want to have in your Ford, it's the 6.0-liter Power-Stroke diesel V8. Let me be clear, this is one of those engines that almost every diesel mechanic has a story about. When Ford rolled the 6.0-liter into Super Duty trucks and E-Series vans in the early 2000s, it was meant to be the next big thing, with plenty of torque and better emissions, but right out of the gate, weak spots showed up. One of the biggest issues is the head gasket and head bolt setup. The stock torque-to-yield head bolts used on the 6.0 just weren't up to the job of holding down the heads under diesel pressures, especially when the engine got hot or was tuned for more power. That means blown gaskets and headaches for owners, sometimes long before 100,000 miles. Fixing that isn't cheap, and a lot of people end up doing an expensive upgrade with stronger studs and reinforced gaskets if they want peace of mind. And this is where it gets worse. Another problem is the 6.0's EGR system and cooler, another major culprit. They're prone to clogging with soot and even cracking internally, which can let coolant leak where it shouldn't be and overheat the engine. The worst part? It doesn't take much idling or city driving before the EGR valve and cooler start to gunk up. When that happens, you might have to repair the EGR cooler, head gasket, and probably a bunch of other cooling system pieces. Oil cooler problems are closely tied in too. If the oil cooler clogs or fails, it starves the EGR cooler of proper cooling and can set off a chain reaction of failures. A lot of owners end up dealing with coolant in the oil, white smoke at startup, and even warped heads when the oil cooler gives up the ghost. Ignoring simple coolant changes can easily turn into a $5,000 repair bill, and that's not an exaggeration. The 6.0-liter V8 has other issues, like fuel injection control module failures, HP oil system issues, and the variable geometry turbo sticking from soot buildup. Some Ford owners can only use their 6.0-liter after upgrading all the components, and others say they would never buy one again because of all the repair costs involved. If you already have one of these engines, routine maintenance can make a huge difference, from sticking to real diesel service intervals and coolant care to early upgrades. But don't miss this. Buying one without knowing the pitfalls is how many Ford owners end up with a truck that consumes cash more than it consumes miles. These engines can be brutal, but with the right care and some savvy upgrades, plenty of them still rack up some serious miles. So now you know how horrible the 6.0-liter V8 engine is. But what you might not know is that Ford tried to improve it with the 6.4-liter Power-Stroke diesel V8. This was supposed to offer more power and torque and cleaner emissions, but no one expected that it would also become one of the worst Ford engines out there. Here's the key part. The 6.4's biggest enemies are heat, soot, and complexity. Those 3 together are deadly. One of the most notorious issues is cracked pistons. The design of those pistons tends to develop stress cracks around the fuel bowl area, often right around the middle mileage, and before you know it, you're hearing knocking, seeing excessive smoke, or losing power. A cracked piston is no joke. Fix it wrong or late, and you can be looking at a major teardown. Another common pain point is the EGR system in coolers. Unlike the 6.0, the 6.4 has dual EGR coolers, and both of them can clog with soot or leak over time. When they fail, you'll see coolant loss, steam out of the exhaust, and higher operating temperatures. And if the coolant gets into the combustion chamber, your engine can hydrolock and bend rods, or ruin pistons. On some 6.4s, the cooling system struggles so much that owners end up replacing radiators and even degas bottles just to keep things stable. But this is where it matters. The radiator design on the 6.4-liter tends to leak, often at the plastic end tanks or seams. A minor puddle under your truck might seem harmless, but on these diesels, loss of coolant quickly turns into overheating and warped heads. If you have this engine, you definitely have to pay attention to the turbochargers. The dual turbos and variable geometry setups sound fancy, but with soot and high regeneration temperatures constantly passing through, seals and bearings wear faster than you might expect. You'll know something's up when you hear whining, smell oil smoke, or notice sluggish boost. Most Ford owners run into trouble when they don't maintain the 6.4-liter V8 engine regularly. If you do own a 6.4, pay attention to the oil and coolant changes, watch for oil dilution during regen cycles, and don't delay on cooling system fixes. A lot of Ford owners upgrade radiators, filtration systems, and even EGR coolers to squeeze more life out of them. Some 6.4s do make it past 200,000 miles, but many only do it with regular maintenance, fixing problems before they get worse, and a little luck. The third worst engine that you can ever have in your Ford is the 5.4-liter Triton V8, which you might find in older F-150s, Expeditions, Navigators, and E-Series vans from the early 2000s. The Triton sounds like a good idea on paper, as a big V8 with plenty of torque. But this engine earned a bad reputation because of some persistent, expensive-to-fix issues. And here's where the problems start. The Triton is known for two different spark plug problems, depending on the generation. On the early 2-valve versions, the plugs only had 4 threads holding them into the cylinder head, meaning they could loosen or even blow out under pressure. On the later 3-valve versions, the 2-piece plugs were prone to seizing and breaking off in the head during removal, leading to a difficult and costly repair. If that happens, you won't have to change the plug. You may need major repair to the cylinder head, and that repair can run into serious money depending on how damaged the threads are. Most people also run into timing chain and cam phaser failures as these engines age. The timing system on 5.4 Tritons, especially the 3-valve versions from around 2004 to 2010, used long chains with guides and tensioners that like to wear out. Now this is when it gets bad. When the tensioner starts to fail, you'll often hear a rattle at startup or a ticking that gets worse with RPM. Let that go, and that loose chain can chew through guides and even skip teeth, throwing off engine timing and risking major internal damage. The cam phasers are parts that help time your valves for better power and economy, and are prone to failure on these motors. When they go bad, you can hear a clatter that's almost like a diesel on startup, and they can throw off how the engine breathes. Cam phaser failures often come with timing chain issues, so if you fix one without the other, all you get is a temporary fix. Ford owners bring in a 2005 or 2007 F-150 with a complaint that just sounds like a rough idle, and by the time it's fully checked, they realize they have to fix the timing kit, guides, tensioners, and phasers, and trust me, this isn't cheap. A lot of owners end up replacing the whole timing set, or even opting for remanufactured engines because doing the work piece by piece becomes a money pit. If you already have a 5.4 Triton and want to keep it running for a long time, don't skip on maintenance. Frequent oil changes with good oil, paying attention to any rattles or unusual noises, and addressing timing component wear early can save you from big failure later. But don't miss this. Even with great care, these engines have quirks that make them more of a headache than many other Ford V8s, and that's why they are one of the worst Ford engines out there. Up to now, it's been all about what to avoid. The engines coming next are where Ford actually got it right. There are some pretty good engines out there that you won't regret going for, starting with the 7.3-liter Power-Stroke diesel V8. If there's one Ford engine that I'll always swear by, it's the 7.3-liter Power-Stroke V8. This engine has earned a reputation over decades as a bulletproof workhorse that just keeps going, because Ford built it tough and kept it simple compared to later, more complicated diesels. When you talk about true longevity in a pickup diesel, the 7.3 is the best option, easily going past 400,000 miles as long as you take care of it regularly. What separates the 7.3 from its successors like the 6.0 and 6.4? Its design isn't stuffed full of complex emissions gear and tiny passages that clog or overheat. The early Power Strokes used a fairly straightforward HEUI fuel system and big rugged iron components that tolerated city streets, highway pulls, and heavy loads without falling apart. With fewer electronics and simpler systems, there are fewer things to fail. This is a big reason why this engine is still widely recommended years after it emerged. Most people run into this motor after having experience with a less reliable diesel, and that's when they really appreciate it. Drivers have purchased an old F-250 with a 7.3, put a couple of 100,000 miles on it, and never complained once about a head gasket or EGR failure. Now don't misunderstand this, the 7.3 doesn't mean you'll never spend on maintenance, as the injectors, glow plugs, and the occasional sensor like the cam position sensor can go bad, but those fixes tend to be small jobs compared to the catastrophic repairs you see on other Ford engines. Just keep this in mind, even the best Ford engines don't survive on design alone. It all depends on how they're maintained, which is why I put all these patterns into a long-term ownership guide. With consistent oil changes, good fuel, and attention to cooling and air filters, a 7.3 Power Stroke can be a truck you trust on long trips and heavy hauls. But there's another V8 you shouldn't miss, and that's the 5.0-liter Coyote V8. Since the Coyote V8 debuted in 2011 in Mustangs and F-150s, this naturally aspirated V8 has been praised for its balance of smooth power, durability, and everyday reliability. I always say that this is the kind of engine that just works, whether you're hauling a trailer or just commuting daily. But what makes the Coyote special? The forged steel crank and stout bottom end give it strength most modern engines don't have. And early generations in particular have racked up miles well past 200,000 with routine care. Many Ford owners who drive 2015 to 2017 F-150s with a 5.0 Coyote find they still run like day one with over 150,000 miles, which says a lot about what this engine can handle if you take care of it. Now, to be fair, even good engines still fail sometimes, though. The Coyote does have a few quirks. Some owners deal with excess oil consumption on certain model years or timing chain tensioner issues, but this mostly happens when they don't keep up with the maintenance. If you stretch the service intervals, you might have to deal with misfires from worn spark plugs or ignition coils, and the older cooling system plastic connectors have been known to leak if they're neglected for too long. But this is what matters. On a 5.0 Coyote, staying on top of oil changes, checking levels regularly, and addressing noises or leaks early can make a huge difference. A lot of owners treat the 5.0 like a set-it-and-forget-it engine, and with the right care, many of them are right, often with a lower long-term cost of ownership than the finicky turbo engines. Most people run into Coyote engines on a used truck or Mustang and end up pleasantly surprised by how solid they are for everyday life. They're responsive, fun to drive, and rugged enough for work without being a headache in the driveway. The 5.0 Coyote is hard to beat, but if you want a V6 engine, you can go for the 3.5-liter EcoBoost V6. This next engine surprises a lot of owners in a good way. The 3.5-liter EcoBoost V6 is a modern Ford engine that, once you sort out the early generation quirks, really earns its place on the list of best Ford engines to own. When this twin-turbo V6 showed up in trucks like the F-150, it changed the game by delivering power and towing capacity close to the big V8, while still giving you better fuel economy. A lot of Ford owners have realized it pulls hard, cruises smoothly, and with the right care can go well into high mileage without catastrophic failure. Here's the key part. The early versions of the 3.5-liter EcoBoost from around 2011 to 2016 had some issues, like timing chain stretch and carbon buildup on the intake valve, mostly because it was one of the first EcoBoost engines Ford put into heavy use. Most of those problems with the early 3.5 V6 showed up when drivers neglected maintenance like regular oil changes, or when the engine spent a lifetime in stop-and-go traffic without getting a good workout. But Ford listened and made meaningful updates over the years. The second generation 3.5, 2017 and on, in the F-150, received major internal updates that improved the timing chain and phaser design for much better durability. Even great engines still need good maintenance habits, and that's true for the 3.5 EcoBoost as well. Ford's updates over the years, especially from the second generation onward, helped reduce some of the older weak points. making the later 3.5 EcoBoost one of the best. Many Ford owners have their trucks with these engines cruise past 200,000 miles with only routine care like oil changes, spark plug swaps, and watching for early signs of wear. Like any turbo engine, the 3.5 EcoBoost rewards you for staying on top of the basics like fresh oil, quality fuels, and quick attention to things like rattles or misfires. When you do that, you'll enjoy strong performance at low RPM, an excellent towing feel, and a surprisingly durable package. That blend of power efficiency and real-world longevity is exactly what puts the 3.5 EcoBoost on the best engines list, especially if you buy smart and maintain it right. And finally, let me tell you why the 2.7-liter EcoBoost V6 is one of the best engines from Ford. This little twin-turbo V6 nails the balance of power, fuel economy, and durability in real life. You'll see it in F-150s, Explorers, Broncos, and more, and a lot of Ford owners have realized that it punches well above its weight without eating you alive at the shop. When the first 2.7 appeared in the mid-2010s, there were a few early quirks, like the oil pan leaks from lightweight plastic, carbon buildup from direct injection, spark plug and ignition coil wear, and even some head gasket complaints, especially on the engines built before 2018. Most of those issues were part of Ford's learning curve with a new turbo engine, and they've fixed or minimized many of them in later versions. By the time you get to the 2018 on engines with dual fuel injection and other updates, the 2.7 just runs and keeps on running. A lot of Ford owners have been using this engine for over 150,000 miles with zero major problems, whether they are towing heavy gear or just using them as daily drivers. Many F-150s with this engine cruise past 100,000 miles and still feel eager under the throttle with good mileage and no noises. Now, as I've said before, this engine isn't a bulletproof choice, and you do need to keep up with regular maintenance like frequent oil changes, watching for early leaks, and maintaining the spark plugs. If you see rough idle or diminishing performance, that is a sign that the plugs or coils are worn out. And some owners have reported odd cold start timing chain clatter or even a rare turbo wear if maintenance slips. But these are usually manageable with attention before they turn into big failures. And here's what matters. Even great engines need good habits, and on the 2.7-liter EcoBoost, that means staying on your service intervals without ignoring odd noises or leaks. Do that, and you get an engine that combines power for towing with long-term reliability for daily use. It's also much cheaper than many high-performance engines out there. I always recommend the 2.7s because this engine rewards regular care with real-world durability, usually without the dramas you see in more complex turbo setups. It's small, efficient, and as long as it's maintained, built to last. And that's exactly what most owners want.